Welcome to Wesley Impact. This is the television program of Wesley Mission, where we invite you to get up close and personal with various aspects of our work. A little later today, I'll continue my message series looking at what it means to be a people with sharp minds. Over the past few weeks, I've talked about having sharp minds that are focused on justice. At Wesley Mission, we do all the good we can, however we can, to work for justice for people who are marginalised in our community, and to do what we can to stand with and give voice to people who otherwise find themselves voiceless. This week, I explore how minds that are focused on justice are prepared to engage in prophetic speech, as well as prophetic witness, actions that back up our words. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you a little later on. But first, my guest in the studio today is National Director of Uniting World, Sureka Goringe. Welcome, Sureka. It's great to have you here. Tell us, what is Uniting World?
Well, Uniting World is two things at once. On the one hand, we are an aid and development agency, a professional organisation that supports people throughout Asia and the Pacific, working to fight poverty and injustice and inequality. On the other hand, we're church. So we exist as a bridge between Christian folks in Australia and the global church to work in missional collaboration to bring about the kingdom of God in real practical ways overseas.
So a lot like Wesley Mission, word and deed together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
So exactly how do you operate? What does it look like on the ground?
Sure. So we have basically partnership relationships with churches in country, across Southeast Asia, South Asia and the Pacific.
How many countries?
We actually have relationships with about 37 churches across about 14 countries, but we don't program with all of them all the time, so programs start and finish. But basically we work through the churches because we believe that the people of God in that country are the ones God has called to serve their community. So our role as Christians in Australia is to stand in solidarity with them and I guess lend them what support and strength we can so that they can deliver God's mission to their people.
So talk to us about some of the programs that Uniting World partners with our overseas partners in doing. What's some of the good that you do?
So with our Pacific church partners, they've identified that the two crucial issues that face their church and their community is climate change and the impact of disasters and gender equality. So all of our missional programming in the Pacific fits under one of those two themes. Across Asia, and we have two partners in Africa as well, our programs are broadly based on poverty alleviation, so helping people lift themselves up out of poverty to establish livelihoods that are sustainable so that they can flourish.
I've seen firsthand the work that Uniting World does with our partners in the Solomon Islands around gender equity in particular. Do you want to speak a bit more about that?
So we were we took a risk about 5 years ago with a way of working on gender equality which hasn't been done by development agencies before. In the Pacific, the church is still the most powerful or most influential civil society organisation there is. They have a huge amount of impact on there. So we worked with church leaders and they identified that actually pushing a dialogue that talks about God's vision for human relationships and the equality of men and women through the teachings of the church, through the Bible, was actually what is going to create a genuine change in behaviour and culture in their communities. So we've been supporting churches in the Pacific to basically engage in that dialogue, a theological dialogue, a biblical teaching dialogue about how men and women were created equal and they can work in partnership for the good of their community. And we've been doing it for 5 years and it's been having profound impact in the communities.
That's fantastic. Now, an organisation with a global footprint, but you act very much locally. It's all about working with local communities, I know, with Uniting World. Can you talk to us about why that's so important?
It's important because when you have the local church and they are the people of their community and they've been there for a long time and they're going to be there for a long time, we as Australian Christians, and we want to support them in their ministry, it's important to engage with them. The witness of Christian unity is to come alongside people who God has called in that place to work. And they are the ones who know what the community needs. They are the ones who know what the best solutions are, not us. So it's part of being good Christian witness in acting in unity with local Christians, but it's also the way of getting the most sustainable development impact on the ground, is to work within local institutions. The other part of it is, of course, our support can come and go because aid funding comes and goes, fundraising goes up and down. But by working with local organisations, you build their leadership and their capacity to have ongoing impact over time. So it's really important that we work through and with the local organisations, and because we're church, we work with churches.
And some of these partnerships, they've gone back more than a century, haven't they?
Absolutely.
And what would be the longest established partnership we have?
Uniting World is set up by the Uniting Church, obviously, and our church has historical links to the Methodist Mission across the Pacific, as well as the Presbyterian Mission and all of the Reformed congregational churches. So our connections, say, with Fiji and Tonga go back to when we were all part of the same Methodist conference when the missionaries from Britain came out. So that's over 100 years. We have connections with the Presbyterian Church in Vanuatu, which goes back to the Presbyterian Mission. These are long-standing historic church-to-church relationships, and the programming work and the collaborative missional work we do, I guess, sits on top of that bridge that exists through history.
We're a long-term family.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to focus on something that's really relevant right now as people are watching this show, and that is around access to COVID vaccinations. And I know that Uniting World, together with other aid organisations, have been lobbying our government and the governments of the world to make sure that there's equity around access. Can you talk to us about why that's important, not just for those we partner with, but also for us as well?
Well, I mean, you'll see my End COVID for All campaign pin, Stu, which is the campaign you're talking about. It comes fundamentally from the fact, it's I guess a fundamental reality of the pandemic is that we can't solve it for the world till we've solved it for everyone. We can't live in little bubbles because the virus doesn't respect those boundaries. So it is important for us to think as the human race, as a global population. And so there is the justice imperative, because these people are our brothers and sisters, and it's not okay for us to be safe while they're struggling with disease. And that call to love our neighbour and be in solidarity with them is, I guess, the primary call to make sure. But there is also a very practical reason that if we don't make sure that everybody in the world is safe from COVID, the virus continues to mutate and become more virulent, and it'll just come back to us anyway. So we don't live in isolation. We're all interconnected. So that's why it's important.
Yeah, we're a global village. That's one thing we've learned.
Absolutely.
Very much so in the last 18 months. Sureka, we're going to take a short break now. We're going to come back and have a conversation with you about, what personally motivates you and what's led you to take on this role, such a dynamic role, and very much a progression from what you were doing before. So we're going to break now. We're going to come back and hear a little bit more from Sureka.
If you would like to learn more about Wesley Mission, visit wesleymission.org.au. You can find help in our community services, connect with our church and congregations, discover a volunteer role that suits you, stay up to date on the latest news and information, donate to support our work, and help make a positive difference in your community. You can also connect with us on social media and subscribe to receive the latest news and information about Wesley Mission directly into your inbox. Visit wesleymission.org.au.
So visit our website to find out more information about Wesley Mission, and be in touch if we can be of any help to you, your family, or your friends in any way. At Wesley Mission, we believe that every person is important to God, and so every person is important to us. Now I'd like to continue my conversation with the National Director of Uniting World, Sureka Goringe. You've been the National Director at Uniting World for 4 years now. Was it always a career in international aid development that you were interested in?
No. So I'm a scientist by training and had most of 20 years in the tech sector, in the private sector. And I guess this is a combination of having a midlife crisis and God having a sense of humour, I think, that's seen me in this role.
I mean, you've underplayed a little bit. I mean, you actually have a PhD, don't you?
I do.
And what sort of field?
In material science. So, as I said, most of my earlier half of my career has been as a scientist in the tech sector doing research and development for developing new products.
And I know that because you and I worked alongside each other for a number of years in voluntary capacity.
That's right.
With Uniting World and its forerunners. So you got engaged at that voluntary level, and then now you stepped into this professional career.
Absolutely. So it was a bit of me coming to a realization that while I loved what I did in my old work in science, it was stimulating. I got to work with smart people and do exciting projects. I felt there was something missing. It's a deeper fulfillment. I wanted to do something, I guess, with my life that went beyond improving somebody's profit margin, really. And about the same time, I was starting to look around for ways in which the skills that I had developed could maybe support something that actually helped make people's lives better. And sometimes when you do things, you feel like you're taking a risk and you're stepping into the unknown. And then you look back and you realize that God's been sort of laying out a breadcrumb trail for you to get there.
That's a wonderful metaphor.
Yeah. And I think my role started at Uniting World as a volunteer. I served on their board. I was actually their chair for a while, which is where I, met you. And then, through a series of circumstances, I found myself being given the opportunity to come on board as one of the executive, and that's the rest is history.
And doing a remarkable job. Now, you've lived in Australia for 24 years, but you've lived in a number of different countries. Talk to us about that journey.
Sure. So I was born in Sri Lanka, and my family left during the war, and my dad worked for the UN, so we lived in a few different countries along the way. And I came to Australia as a young adult, just having finished university in the UK. I think it's a really significant part of my journey because in my current role, I think I've experienced living in developing countries because my dad worked for the United Nations Development Programme, so we didn't live in exotic countries. We lived in, Botswana and Bangladesh. And
so there's real family history and heritage in aid and development, isn't there?
Sort of. But I think I got to see what it's like when well-meaning overseas NGOs show up in your country and want to help. And being the recipient of aid and seeing the struggles of the power imbalances and the autonomy and all of that, I think it gives me a real insight on how to be good NGOs when you go and work overseas with partners, how to be respectful of the power and the autonomy and the dignity of people. And that's, I find, a very valuable part. The other side of it, of course, is that growing up as I did, the whole relating across cultures and understanding that people from different places, different languages think differently and work differently, that's obviously a huge help for me as I try and build relationships with people from very many different cultures and languages. So I really value my sort of childhood, as it were, because,
So you're clearly very passionate about what you do and the mission that you're engaged in. What drives that passion? What drives that engagement? Where's that come from?
I think two places. One of my first trips in Uniting World, I went to India and I met this minister whose jurisdiction was technically India, but he was across the river from Nepal. But he wanted to reach the people on the other side because he knew that they had both needs in their daily lives, but also needs pastoral care. So he had an inner tube that he would blow up, and he would swim across the river in this inner tube to get to the villages so that he could take them the help that he could, but also talk to them about God. These are the kind of people I get to meet and work with. So for me, it's that great cloud of witnesses thing. My job, it's a privilege to meet amazing people who do extraordinary things in unimaginable circumstances. And there is a part which says, I can't quit when this is what God is doing in the world through these people. I want to be part of that team. And I think the second is, I guess, a sense of call, that this privilege of being invited to do something, to be a part of something huge that God is doing in the world through God's people, but also the fact that knowing that I'm a small part of a bigger thing, and so if I stuff it up, I'm not going to break anything because, God's got a bigger thing happening. But it's a real privilege to do this work, and it's the best thing I've ever done.
So Sureka, what would you say to anyone who's watching today who wants to get involved? You know, they may want to go overseas, or more particularly, they may want to partner with some of our friends overseas, and sometimes they feel a bit helpless or hopeless. They don't know what the next step might be. What would you say to them?
I would say, go have a look at our website, follow us on social, and sign up to our newsletter, because we thrive on telling the stories of what God is doing through our partners, the amazing work of our partners. And for me, that's a privilege of this job, is that we bring back into the Australian context the insights and the wisdom and the prophetic word of what our partners are doing. And I think being part of that is the first step. Obviously, we can't do our work without the support of Christians in Australia. So I would love for people to step up and say, I want to be part of what God's doing in the world. I want to support the ministry of churches overseas. But I think there's also a shift in our minds that we need to make to be part of this journey, because we come from a history, I guess our colonial history, and we think of missionaries and we think of charity, but this is not it. No. This is the global church and us stepping up to be citizens of God's kingdom in solidarity, in equal mutual relationship. So one thing you can do to help yourself in your own discipleship to learn how to be a good global neighbour is use a resource that Uniting World has developed called How to Be a Good Global Neighbour. It's a series of Bible studies that you can do by yourself or with a small group. And it'll invite you into a way of relating to the global church that is different from maybe the ways you've thought of before.
Fantastic. So the website address?
unitingworld.org.au.
Fantastic. And social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter?
Absolutely, everywhere.
All those places.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Uniting World is part of the Uniting Church family, as is Wesley Mission. And can I encourage you strongly to support them in their work? It's vital work. And you know, my engagement with Uniting World and with the work that they are doing overseas is that we always learn far more than we contribute. And what Sureka has talked about, that mutuality of relationship, is just so important to recognise what God is doing in other places in unique ways. Sureka, thank you so much for coming today. It's been just a great joy to have you join us on the program, and God bless you in your work and the work of Uniting World.
Thank you, Stu. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I'll be back in just a moment.
I think people are amazing. We can turn dark to light. We can fly through storms. We can change worlds, but we can't always do it alone. If you need help, we could work together. Find out more at wesleymission.org.au. We are here for you.
Please get in touch with us. If Wesley Mission can help you, a friend or a family member in any way, remember, we are here for you. Today I'm continuing my series on the theme of being people with sharp minds, minds that are focused on working for and achieving justice. In previous weeks, I shared that mind focused on achieving justice is a mind that is prepared to engage in prophetic witness. I'll continue to talk about that a little more today, and then talk about the importance of prophetic speech. Brian Stevenson wrote the best-selling book, Just Mercy. It was a movie just the last year or so. For decades now, he's been working to release innocent prisoners who've been condemned to death row because of injustices in the American legal system, and particularly some of the racist undertones that enable that. And on one particular occasion, he was defending an African-American man who'd been convicted of murder, yet there were 12 witnesses who gave him a rock-solid alibi, who in the initial trial were never able to testify. And so on appeal, the judge reluctantly allowed at least one of them to testify, and this one particular woman, Mrs. Williams, was selected to represent all the other witnesses. Let me read what Brian Stevenson says. One older black woman named Mrs. Williams was chosen to represent this group. But there was another big problem. A huge German shepherd stood guard outside the courtroom. When Mrs. Williams, who was deathly afraid of dogs, saw the dog, she froze, and then her body began to shake. Tears started running down her face before she turned around and ran out of the courtroom. Later she said, "Mr. Stevenson, I feel so badly I let you down today. I was meant to be in that courtroom. I should have been in that courtroom. And then she started to cry and I couldn't console her. She said, I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there so bad. But when I saw that dog, all I could think about was Selma, Alabama, 1965, and the civil rights movement. I remember how they beat us, and I remember the dogs. I wanted to move. I tried to move, but I couldn't do it. And she walked away, tears running down her face. The courtroom was packed. The next day, her sister told Mrs. Stevenson that Mrs. Williams didn't eat or talk to anybody all night. They just heard her praying all night long the same prayer, Lord, I can't be scared of no dog. Lord, I can't be scared of no dog. The next morning, she walked up to Stevenson and said, I ain't scared of no dog. I ain't scared of no dog. And then she walked right past that huge German Shepherd into the courtroom. The courtroom was packed when the judge walked in and everyone rose and sat down except Mrs. Williams. She told the entire courtroom in a loud, firm voice, I'm here. But Stevenson said what she was saying wasn't that she was physically present. She was saying, I may be old, I may be poor, I may be black, but I am here because I've got a vision of justice that compels me to stand up to injustice. And that's when the tide of the case began to turn. My friends, prophetic witness says, we're here. We're here and we have a vision of justice that's been coloured and flavoured and given to us by the biblical witness. We're here because the Spirit has compelled us to be here. We're here because God has called us to be here. You see, prophetic witness will always require courage. And can I tell you, prophetic witness will always lead to trouble. Always. If we think we can play it safe, and be a prophetic witness, those two things, they don't go together. The French theologian Jacques Ellul said this, Christians should be troublemakers, creators of uncertainty, agents of a dimension incompatible with society. That, my friends, is called the kingdom of God. Minds focused on achieving justice, engage in prophetic witness. Minds focused on achieving justice, engage in prophetic speech. Our 12th superintendent, depending on how you count them, is Sir Alan Walker. He led our mission, Wesley Mission, from 1958 to 1978. It was a time of tumultuous change, both here at Wesley Mission, but more particularly in our broader Australian and, it has to be said, international community. Just think of all the things that happened in that period. Alan Walker was a dynamic evangelist. He was a gifted pastor. He was a world-class leader, and he was a fearless prophet. Absolutely fearless. In fact, he was known by some of the media here in Sydney as the most dispute-prone pastor in Sydney. What a great description. He was always getting in trouble. He was getting in trouble with religious leaders, political leaders, business leaders. He was getting in trouble with leaders here at Wesley Mission all the time. And he used his considerable rhetoric, his rhetorical skills to argue the case around issues of injustice again and again and again. I'll spend more time next week looking into the prophetic work of Alan Walker in the 1960s and 70s and look at some of the issues where Wesley Mission stood for justice. But for us right here, right now, would you join us in being prepared to march to the beat of a different drum when it comes to some of the injustices that we have in our world, particularly in relation to financial and housing inequality, the treatment of the marginalised and people groups who are often overlooked? Will you stand with Wesley Mission to help bring about justice for all, just as Alan Walker did in the 60s and 70s, and as we are called to do today? At Wesley Mission, we believe that every person is important and valuable to God, and so every person is valuable to us. As such, we will do all we can, by whatever means we can, and however we can, to give a voice to the voiceless and to make a stand with the people who we are called to serve. Will you join us? I'll be back in just a moment.
At Wesley Mission, We see kindness change kids' worlds. You can find out more at wesleymission.org.au. We are here for you.
Thank you once again for being a part of the program today. I always look forward to spending this time with you and hope we can do it again next week. I found the conversation with Sureka interesting and I hope you did too. Sureka is someone who has a heart for sharing God's love with people around the world. If you feel called to serve others, would you consider taking Sureka's advice to follow God's prompting in your life? Who knows where it could lead? Don't forget to be in touch with us if we can be of help to you, a friend, or a family member in any way. Our details are on the screen now. See you at the same time and the same place next week. Every blessing to you and to those you love.
Wesley Mission walks alongside people of all ages struggling with homelessness, addictions, mental health issues and financial stress. To find out more, visit wesleymission.org.au.